Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Tzadidawa, Bava Basra 94. Baruch Hashem. We'll start at the Mishnah on the bottom of 93b. We're going to dedicate our Daf for a Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. So says the Mishnah, Hamocher Peros L'Chavero, somebody who sells his produce to his friend. The person who purchases it, harei ze mekabel of rova tinofes seya. For every seya of wheat that you buy, the purchaser recognizes that there's going to be a quarter kav of impurities. Anytime you buy something in life, you have a little bit of things that are not ideal with it. You have to accept that. Te'enim mekabel of eser metulos. You get the figs. For 100, Lameya, for 100, 10 of them will be wormy. Martev Shal Yayin, you buy a cellar of wine, Mikabel of Eser Kosasos Lameya. You're going to have 10 barrels of wine, that'll be bad for every 100. Kankanim Bisharon, let's say you have the jugs in the Sharon, Mikabel of Eser Pizzos Lameya. You're going to have for every 100 jugs, you're going to have 10 that are shvach, that are not so good. So comes along Rav Katina, Tani Rav Katina. Rav Katina taught, Rova Kitnios Laseya. So he says that which we said, you're going to get for every seya that you buy, you're going to get a rova of things that is not what you've ordered. It means you'll get a rova of beans, that the beans will be mixed in with the wheat. That's what we're talking about, but not that you're going to get stones or dirt, but you're going to get beans. And because they're harvested next to each other, so you'll get the beans with the wheat, and that's what's acceptable. That you have to accept that. But not if it would be earth or pebbles. That you can return. Gemara says, Vafruris lo. You mean to say if it's dirt, you can't return it. We have this teaching in the name of Rabba that if a person comes along and is borer tzrar migarono shel chavero, so one guy comes along and he sees that his friend has a pile of wheat and he's about to sell it, and he decides to pick out the stones from it. He thinks he's doing him a favor, he's getting rid of the stones, but really, this guy who came along, this nosy neighbor, cost the seller because he would have been allowed to leave in there up to a quarter kav of stones. And now that he took it out, this guy is not allowed to put back stones because you can't deliberately put stones in. You're allowed to have them there, but you can't deliberately put them in. And so now he has to replace them with wheat. So this guy who caused him this damage on the top of 94a, no sin lo d'mei chitin. He has to pay him the amount that he damaged in wheat because now this guy has to put in the wheat. Now the seller has to put in the wheat. So the Gemara, let me just get back to this point in a second, but the Gemara's answer is Kitnius Rova Afruris Pachos Mi Rova. The Gemara says, yeah, if it was Kitnius, you're allowed to have there up to a Rova. If it would be dirt, you're allowed to have some there, but it's not as much as a Rova. It's less than a quarter Rova. So then the commentaries discuss why does this person who took the stones out, how is he responsible? What did he do? He didn't damage him directly, it was indirect damage. So therefore, Rashbam says, Hifchito b'mida, he lowered the amount. Do you have a mizabin le'yimachitin? Because this guy was selling the dirt with the wheat. And he can't do it deliberately. So that's the problem. And then the Rashbam says it's actually direct damage. Why? He says when he picks it up and throws the stones out, that's actual damage with his hands, because those pebbles were worth exactly like the wheat. But then Rashbam gives an alternative answer. He says, Inami, it's not considered actual damages. because the stones themselves are not worth anything. But he's going to be liable because of what's called dina digarmi, indirect damage. What's indirect damage? Like, for example, if you burn the contract of your friend, so therefore your friend can't collect the money, or if you sow koyim into your friend's field, because at that moment, even though it's not recognizable, he's stealing his money. So this is what's called garmi. And what's the case of gramam b'nezikin, which we say is pater, indirect damages, which is pater. That's where the damage is recognizable, says Rashbam, but he doesn't do it with his hands. But garmi is where you do it with your hands. That's the distinction of Rashbam. Rivam says that this is like the position, Tosfos quotes Rivam, he says this is like the position of Rabbi Shimon, who says something that causes money is like money, and he's going to be liable. He gives the case of chametz on Pesach. So therefore, he says Gram Nezikin is chayev. But the Reed says it comes even according to the Rabbanan. Why? But because here in this case, it's like he stole the wheat themselves. So that's the answer of the Reed. Okay, back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Va'afroris rovalo, so you're not allowed to have up to a quarter kav of dirt in there. Va'atanya mochar peros l'chavero chitin mekabel avrova kitnios l'seas or mekabel avrova nishoves l'seya nadash mekabel avrova afroris l'seya. But you're saying you're not allowed to have up to a quarter kav of dirt, but we have in the price, if you sell the wheat, you can get up to a quarter kav of beans. Sell the barley, you can have up to a quarter kav of straw. And the lentils, you can have up to a quarter kav of dirt. And so don't we say, just like you can have up to a quarter cup of dirt for lentils, will be the same thing for wheat and barley. So we see you could have up to a quarter cup of dirt. Gemara says, no. Shani Adash, in the case of lentils, are different than mi'akar akrelu, because the lentils, you tear it up out of the ground, and therefore it's torn up with the dirt, and that's why you're allowed to have that much dirt. But wheat and barley are cut off, not torn up from the ground, and so therefore you're not allowed to have that much. Gemara says, so you say wheat and barley, you're not allowed to have that much. Tivshel minei, why don't we learn out from here? The opposite, chiti v'sa'ari da'afruris. So tivshel minei, chiti v'sa'ari da'afruris. So why don't we learn out from here that wheat and barley, you're allowed, why don't we learn out from here then the opposite? That by wheat and barley, the person is not accepting up to a quarter kav of the dirt. So the Gemara says, no, will say first. It's possible to read it that you are accepting up to a quarter kav of afuris for the wheat and the barley. And adashim is the Bryce is just giving us the chiddush about the lentils. You might have thought, since he's getting rid of the lentils, therefore, since he's uprooting the lentils, yoser miruba nami l'kavo. Therefore, since the lentils are uprooted from the ground, the purchaser is really accepting upon himself more than a quarter kav because he knows the lentils come from the ground. We might have thought that, so therefore the price has to teach us kamash moan that lentils the purchaser is only accepting upon himself a quarter kav. So now the Rav Huna comes along and teaches us a big chiddush. Says Rav Huna, in bo'anafos minafes kulo. Let's say the purchaser is picking out the beans and he's sifting them out, and he discovers that there's more than a quarter kav in there, and so he wants to return them. Now he can return all of them, not just the excess of a quarter kav, but all the beans. So that's what Rav Huna said. So Amri La Dina, Amri La Kanasa. Some said this was the letter of the law that he can return all of them. And some say, no, this is just a penalty against the seller that we allow him to return all of them. So the Rashbam says, well, why do we care what it is? The Rashbam says, the nafkamina, the iya dinam be delo ariv, if we know for sure that he didn't mix them in intentionally, then afilu tfei mirova have mechil avakana lekech. then he would accept upon himself even more than a roba. So if it would be a penalty and we know for sure that he didn't do it intentionally, then we wouldn't penalize him even if it was more. And that's why we need to know the difference between a din and a kanas. So some say that this was a letter of the law, din, and some say this was a kanas, a penalty. Amrle Dina, the ones who say it's a letter of the law, because Manda Yav Zuzi, the guy who gives the money, Aperi Shapira Yav, he's giving it for good fruits. Virova Lotarach Inish. And if it was a quarter cup, a person is not going to bother himself to get rid of the extra beans to get rid of it. But Yoser Miroba, but if it's more than that, Tarach Inish, a person will spend his time getting rid of it. Bekima the Tarach, once you bring out the sifter and you start sifting it, Tarach Bakul, you'll get rid of everything. That's what the Gemara says. But Amile, alternatively, some say it's a kanas. Why? Kanasa, rova shchiach, because generally speaking, to have excess beans in there, you'll have a quarter kav. That's common. Yoser lo shchiach, but more than that is not common. The iu hu da'arev, and this guy, this seller, is the one who mixed them in. The kivan da'arev, and since he mixed them in, kansu rabbanim b'kulei. The rabbis say, "Oh, you mixed it in, so we'll penalize you, and you're not entitled to everything." So now the Gemara is going to challenge, first of all, is it a din or is it a kanas? So the Gemara is going to raise this question. There's actually this whole Gemara now, we're going to have 8 separate proofs, attempts to prove. It's actually a difference of opinion about how we read this Gemara. There's 2 ways to read it, at least 2 ways. One is to say, is the Gemara trying to prove whether the halacha is like Rav Huna, that once you return it, you return everything? Or is the Gemara trying to prove, is it a din or a kanas, this law of Rav Huna? So there's 2 ways to read this Gemara, and we'll see. We'll take it as it comes. Meisvei. So the Brisa says, "Kol seah sheyesh barova." So any, it says in the, it says in the Mishnah Mesechas Koyim, any seah that will have a quarter kav of different species in it, min acher, you might. So the Koyim, you're not allowed to mix 2 seeds. So if you have 1 seed and then a quarter kav of another seed, you can get rid of it, you can lower it. Savrua, the ruba de koyim, the Gemara's assumption is when it says a quarter kav of koyim, which makes it prohibited, is kiyos or miruba, is like mehacha, dahacha. It's like when you have more than a quarter kav of beans mixed in with the wheat. And so just by the koyim, we are allowed to take it away and you just get it under a quarter kav. So too here, we should be allowed to just lower the beans down to a quarter kav. Kotani might. Where says no. Ruba de koyim ki ruba de hachadami. No, the quarter kav of koyim is exactly like the ruba de hachi. Is exactly like the quarter kav of bean. I mean, up to a quarter kav is permitted. And if that's the case, so why are you allowed to just? Why do you have to lower the amount of koyim there? Why can't you leave it if you're allowed to have up to a quarter kav? No, because koyim is biblically speaking prohibited. It's a stringency. And koyim is prohibited also to have a benefit from. So therefore, we say you have to make it less than a quarter. And the Gemara says, if that's the case, what's the next clause? Rabbi Yossi Omer Yibor. Rabbi Yossi says that you have to get rid of everything. Now, Amris Bishlama, if you want to say that it's kiyoser miruba, that it's like more than a quarter cup of beans, kiyoser miruba tenufes dame bahaka miflagi, then we understand the argument. Tanakama Savar, Rokansina Hetera Atu Isura, the Tanakama is of the position that we don't penalize the heter of allowing up to a quarter. The Tanakama will be of the position, Rokansina Hetera Atu Isura, that we don't Tanakama is of the position we don't penalize the permitted amount because of the prohibited amount. We don't penalize the permitted amount up to a quarter via the amount that's prohibited, which is the exact quarter. And Rabbi Yossi Savar Kantina, Rabbi Yossi says we do penalize. Only Amras Karova Dami, but if you say it's exactly like the Rova, in which case it's permitted, Amai Gibor, why does Rabbi Yossi say you have to get rid of it if it's permitted? So Gemara says, no, Hasamainu Time with Rabbi Yossi, the Mishum the Milchseki Mekayim Kaim. No, Rabbi Yossi is not saying that by the letter of the law you have to get rid of it, but because it looks like you're upholding the Kalayim, because it's Marasayin, it looks like the Kalayim, so therefore we have to get rid of it. Gemara again attempts to weigh in on this issue. Tashma Shnaim Sheifkidu Eitzel Echad Zem Manav Zem Masayim. So this comes back to the Mishnah that we had in Bava Basra, the case in Bava Basra. Two people deposited with, let's say, the banker. One gave him $100 and one gave him $200. Echad Zem Mana, Echad Zem Masayim. Now each one comes back. Zelmar Masayim Shali. It was Zelmar Masayim Shali. Each one says the 200 is mine. So then what do? No single zemana or zemana. So the banker gives back each one of them $100, and the remaining 100 he leaves till Elijah comes. And so we see from here that it's not like Rav Huna says that you get rid of everything, that you lose everything, because here in this case he has to give back a little bit. So the Gemara says no. I mean to say it's not a penalty, it's a law. So the Gemara says, two cases are not the same. In that case, each one is entitled to $100 by the law. They certainly are owed $100. And here, we don't say that he's entitled to the whole. And here in this case, the reason why he's entitled to everything back is because maybe the guy actually mixed it in. We don't know that he put the beans in there innocently. Maybe he mixed it in intentionally. So Gemara says, well, from the next clause, Tashma Miseifa, Rabbi Yossi came Mahib Said Aramah. Rabbi Yossi says, well, if you're going to give each guy back $100, and in the future, then the guy lost them. The guy who lied didn't lose anything. He lost nothing by taking this outrageous gamble and lying. And so everything is left until Elijah comes. So this makes it sound like you penalize him and say like it's a kanas and nobody gets anything. So the Gemara says, no, Hachi Asha, is this the same law? There, in that case, for sure, one of them was a liar. In this case of the beans, you're not sure that everybody's a liar, that he's for sure a liar. So therefore, this is not a case, not a proof for Rav Huna. Another attempt to say whether or not Rav Huna is tin, that he then can get refund on all the beans that were put in. Tashma shtar sheyesh bo ribis. So let's say you have a contract that has interest in it. So you penalize him, the inogova was the karam was ribis. And in the end, he can't collect not the principal and not the interest. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's position. So if you have a contract that has interest, you penalize him, he doesn't collect the principal or the interest. That's Rabbi Meir's position. So that's like what Rav Huna is saying, that once there's more than the amount of beans, you don't collect anything. So Rav Meir is like Rav Huna, or Rav Huna is like Rav Meir. So Gemara says, Hachi Hasha, do you think these two cases are the same? Hasam Mishas Kasivahu the Avale Shuma. No, there in the case of the contract with the interest, from the moment that he wrote out the contract that he's going to collect interest, he's in violation of the law of interest. We don't know for sure that this guy actually did anything wrong. We don't know for sure that he deliberately put the beans in it. And Gemara says, well, what about the next clause in that price? And what about the next clause in that brisa? Tashma, it says the brisa. Miseifa, the Chachamim say, go vest the karam, the eno go vest the ribis. You collect the principal and not the interest. So this would seem to be against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says everything goes. And here we're saying, no, you retain the principal. So the Gemara says, no. Hachi Hasha, this is not the same case. Hasam Vadai. In that case, the principal was for sure a loan. So therefore, the Chachamim are saying is entitled to it back. Here, we don't know for sure that the beans that were placed in there were permitted. So therefore, it's not a question against Rav Huna. So, hold on, we'll stop the recording here, but we can continue learning. We have some more time.